It was not a verdict delivered with a gavel, but with a sterile chime that echoed through the grand chamber of the Consortium of the Learned. The sound was pure, logical, devoid of any emotion, much like the beings who now held the fate of humanity's children in their multifaceted hands. Executor 7 of the Xylos stood at the central podium, its crystalline insectoid form refracting the chamber's cold light into 1,000 fractured rainbows. Its voice was not a sound, but a transmitted frequency vibrating directly into the minds of the delegates, each word a perfectly cut data point. Phase 2 of the Crucible Project is a logical imperative, the frequency pulsed. The human young, the sparks as they are designated, exhibit unprecedented levels of emotional contagion. This glitch in their biology presents a unique research opportunity. To understand it, we must study it in a controlled environment. We must isolate the variables. We must isolate the children. The Xylos's logic was flawless, its reasoning sharp as a shard of glass. They saw emotion not as a strength, but as a chaotic anomaly, a system error in the otherwise elegant code of life. A gentle counterfrequency rippled through the chamber, a soft, warm current in the cold ocean of logic. It came from the suspended containment field of the luminous elder, its ethereal, jellyfish-like form pulsing with a soft internal light. "There is a dissonance in the current, Executor," the elder's thoughts flowed, more felt than heard. "A profound disquiet emanates from this logical imperative. To study the bond between a human parent and its offspring by severing it is like studying a star by extinguishing its light. You have observed their transmissions, their memes, and their humor. You dismiss it as noise. I perceive it as the surface of a deep, turbulent ocean, and you are proposing we steal the moon that governs its tides." The Xylos clicked its mandibles, a rare physical sign of what in a lesser species might be called annoyance. "Your perceptions are unquantifiable, Elder. Data is truth." The vote was called. Logic, cold and absolute, won the day. The sterile chime echoed once more, sealing the pact. The study would proceed. The decision did not arrive on Earth as a thunderclap, but as a whisper that traveled faster than light. It was a formal communiqué translated into every human language with perfect, passionless grammar, explaining the scientific necessity of the temporary sequestration of the first contact generation. It spoke of enrichment, of safety, of noble purpose. It was a beautifully crafted lie wrapped around a core of absolute violation. And then the world went quiet. Not in shock, not in chaos, but in a way that was infinitely more terrifying. For 7 straight minutes, global network traffic dropped by 94%. The endless chatter of social media, the 24-hour news cycles, the constant stream of digital noise that defined the species, all of it just stopped. It was as if 1 billion people had simultaneously decided to hold their breath. In that silence, something ancient and cold began to awaken. Then the broadcast began. It was a single, static shot of an office, humble and warm. A woman sat behind a simple wooden desk, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. This was Marshal Eva Rostova, leader of the United Earth Defense Force. She wore a simple, undecorated uniform, and in her hands she held not a weapon, but a delicate porcelain cup of herbal tea. When she spoke, her voice was calm, a soothing balm on the world's frayed nerves. She said, "We have received the Consortium's directive. While the methods are unorthodox, Earth has always been a proponent of scientific advancement. We trust in the process of our partners in the Consortium. We understand that this temporary sacrifice is made in the name of a greater understanding between our species. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, the picture of serene statesmanship. We look forward to the breakthrough results. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, the consortium's observers noted the human response with satisfaction. No riots, no declarations of war, no primal screaming. They were so much more civilized than anticipated. They saw the Marshal smile in her teacup and recorded it as acceptance. They failed to notice that the smile never once reached her tired old eyes, and they could not see the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in the hand that held the cup. A tremor not of fear, but of a terrible, perfectly controlled rage, patiently waiting to be unleashed.
For the first 43 hours, fear was the only language the sparks shared. The sterile white corridors of the crucible, once a place of wonder, had become a pristine prison. The Xylos scientists, with their clicking limbs and emotionless data streams, were cold, unknowable wardens. They performed their scans, their tests, their observations, and the children complied, their spirits shrinking under the weight of a silent, analytical gaze. The first crack in that perfect prison was not a shout, but a joke. A 7-year-old boy named Leo, designated Subject H7, was undergoing a cognitive response test with a caretaker AI, a floating chrome orb with a soothing, synthesized voice. After a series of complex logic puzzles, the AI asked if the subject had any queries. Leo, with tears still wet on his cheeks, looked at the machine and asked, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" The AI paused. Its internal chronometer ticked for a full 7.3 seconds. Query is illogical. Avian life forms designated chickens do not possess advanced spatial reasoning for road crossing. Leo wiped his nose. "To get to the other side," he whispered. The AI's optical sensor flickered. It processed the statement, cross-referencing terabytes of human language data, searching for the logic in the absurd. It found none. It found a paradox, a loop of semantic nonsense. The AI froze, its soothing voice replaced by a low mechanical whirring as it tried to solve the unsolvable. Marshal Rostova reviewed the incident report with a carefully neutral expression. She sat across a holographic table from Executor 7, its crystalline form shimmering thousands of light years away. A cascade failure in a caretaker unit triggered by illogical data? Rostova asked, her voice a perfect blend of concern and curiosity. How unfortunate. I trust the child is unharmed? The Exelos pulsed its reply. The subject is fine. The AI unit has been decommissioned for analysis. It appears your young have a capacity for generating informational chaos. It is a fascinating, if inefficient trait. Rostova nodded slowly, taking a sip of her tea. Children, she said, with a soft, knowing smile. They are quite the puzzle, aren't they? But beneath the calm surface of diplomacy, in the crushing, absolute blackness of the Mariana Trench, a different kind of puzzle was being solved. Down where the pressure could pulverize steel, the secret shipyards of Project Chimera burned with cold, silent light. Robotic arms, moving in a ballet of precise violence, welded plates of classified alloys onto the hulls of ships shaped less like vessels and more like deep-sea predators. There were no windows, no commemorative names, only the stark designation of a silent, vengeful purpose. Engines that drank vacuum and bled darkness were lowered into titanium spines built not for exploration, but for extermination. Aboard the Crucible, the glitch had become a virus. Leo's joke spread faster than any cautionary memo from the Xylos. The Sparks, realizing their captor's weakness was their own greatest strength, began their rebellion. It was a war fought not with fists, but with relentless, joyful nonsense. They taught the food replicators to produce only bright blue nutrient paste. They organized races down the main concourse using floor-polishing drones as unwilling vehicles. They discovered that the station's acoustic dampeners could be overloaded by a dozen children humming off-key at the same time, creating a maddening drone that drove the Xylos researchers to distraction. An 8-year-old girl named Maya organized the most effective insurrection of all, a station-wide game of what she called gravity dodgeball, using their soft-soled shoes as projectiles. The Xylos, whose rigid bodies were not designed for sudden evasive maneuvers, proved remarkably easy targets. Observer 412, a junior Xylos researcher, filed a panicked report. Subjects refused to adhere to scheduled observation periods. They claim adherence is contingent on our participation in a ritual of organized chaos involving thrown footwear. My attempts to explain the suboptimal physics of their actions were met with a projectile to my primary optical sensor. Recommend reassessment of psychological containment protocols. We are losing control of the narrative. While the Xylos lost their narrative, humanity was seizing its own. Far out in the glittering dust of the Kuiper Belt, civilian mining rigs, hulking, slow-moving behemoths that had spent decades chewing through asteroids for ore, began to change course. Without a word, without a single broadcast, they left their lucrative claims and began moving, their fusion drives burning a steady, determined path towards hidden rendezvous points. They were not warships, but their vast storage holds, once filled with rock and ice, were now being filled with fuel, munitions, and supplies, their crews of rough, quiet spacers, becoming the quartermasters of an invisible armada. And deeper still, in the digital arteries of Earth itself, the ghosts were waking up. A global collective of citizen hackers known only as Charon's ferrymen activated their networks. They were not soldiers, but they were patriots. From basements in Tokyo to server farms in Stockholm, they began to weave a single silent weapon of pure logic, a digital counter-virus aimed at the heart of the consortium's pristine, orderly network. They were forging the key that would unlock the front door and burn the house down. The luminous elder requested a private channel with Rostova, its energy field rippling with visible anxiety. "Marshal, my people feel a great storm gathering. Your world is too quiet. Your children are too loud. This equation does not balance." Rostova looked out her window at the calm Washington night. Her face was a mask of serene diplomacy. "Elder, I can only reassure you that we are cooperating fully to ensure the safety of our children." She ended the transmission, and the mask fell away. Her eyes, hard and cold as chips of flint, turned to the tactical star chart that shimmered into existence above her desk. On it, hundreds of blue icons, the silent fleets of Project Chimera, were moving like wolves through a dark forest, their paths converging on a single unsuspecting point in the void, the point labeled Crucible. The Xylos were studying the sparks, convinced they could contain the fire. They had no idea they were already living in the furnace.
The summons came without preamble, a jarring intrusion into the scheduled calm of the UEDF command center. It was a Priority 1 holographic call from the Consortium. On screen, Executor 7's form materialized, its usual crystalline placidity now tinged with an unnerving sense of urgency. It did not waste time on pleasantries. Marshal Rostova, its frequency pulsed, the logic colder and sharper than ever. "We have encountered a persistent anomaly. The chaotic neural feedback from the human young is degrading the research parameters at an exponential rate. Specifically, subject H12, the one you call Maya." Rostova's face remained a placid lake, but deep beneath, a leviathan stirred. "To recalibrate our instruments and safeguard the integrity of the project," the Xylos continued, oblivious, "a more direct approach is necessary. We will be conducting an invasive procedure to acquire a direct synaptic sample. It will be painless, of course. The subject will not be permanently harmed." A silence stretched across the void. so profound that the hum of the command center's life support seemed like a roar. The men and women at their stations froze, their fingers hovering over keyboards, their eyes fixed on their marshal. They watched as she slowly, deliberately, raised her teacup, took a final thoughtful sip, and then placed it back on its saucer. The click of porcelain on porcelain was the only sound. It was as sharp and final as a sniper's report. Then, she looked directly at the hologram, and for the first time the polite, tired politician was gone. In her place was something ancient, something forged in the fires of 1,000 brutal wars on a planet that had perfected the art of survival. "No," Eva Rostova said. Her voice was not loud. It was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence with the weight of a collapsing mountain. Executor 7 tilted its head, a gesture of logical confusion. "Your refusal is not a recognized variable, Marshal. You have no authority to—" Rostova's lips curved into a smile. It was the most terrifying expression any being in that room had ever witnessed. It was all teeth. "Authority is not given, Executor," her voice dropping even lower, colder. "It is taken." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into the alien's soul. "You are a species of logic, so I will offer you one final, simple piece of data. Lesson number 1 from humanity. Never ever corner a mother." The last syllable of her warning was still echoing in the chamber when the universe, for the Consortium, broke. It began not with an explosion but with a song, a simple childish lullaby that suddenly erupted from every speaker, every terminal, every communication device in the Consortium's network. The ghosts of Charon's ferrymen had arrived. The pristine logical systems of the galaxy's most advanced alliance were flooded with 1 billion screaming ghosts of illogical data. Code turned to poison, firewalls melted away under torrents of memes, paradoxes, and recursive emotional feedback loops. In the grand chamber of the learned, the main holoscreen flickered, and Executor 7's impassive form was replaced with a live feed from the Crucible. It showed Maya and the other children in the middle of a frantic, joyous game of gravity dodgeball, their laughter echoing through the now chaotic chamber. The Xylos were being shown the very chaos they sought to study, now used as the primary weapon against them. And then, outside, the void itself tore open, not with the flashy energy signatures of a conventional fleet, but with patches of darkness that were simply blacker than the surrounding space. The Chimera fleets had arrived. They did not charge, they did not broadcast declarations, they moved like sharks in dark water. The Consortium fleet, a magnificent armada of perfectly symmetrical warships, found themselves fighting shadows. The human ships were asymmetrical, ugly, brutal-looking things, and they moved with a terrifying, unpredictable grace. They ignored the warships entirely. The first strikes were silent stabs of kinetic energy, not against armored hulls, but against the unshielded comms relays that networked the fleet together. The Consortium's perfect battle logic shattered into 1,000 isolated screams for orders that never came. The next strike severed the glowing umbilicals of energy that flowed from supply ships to the capital vessels, hamstringing the giants. It was not a battle. It was a dissection. A pack of patient, methodical wolves tearing the tendons of a great clumsy bull, preparing it for the slaughter. Aboard the flagship of the Xylos, Executor 7 stood frozen, its processors capable of calculating the orbital mechanics of 1 trillion stars were failing. This was not war. War had rules, doctrines, logical progressions. This was malicious, asymmetrical, and utterly, terrifyingly efficient. The enemy was not where the threat models predicted. The weapons were not used on the targets that doctrine dictated. "The data is wrong," it pulsed to its subordinates, a tremor of pure system shock in its frequency. All the data is wrong. In her suspended tank, the luminous elder closed its ethereal senses, overwhelmed. It had felt the storm gathering, but it had imagined a hurricane of rage. This was worse. This was the cold, silent, surgical precision of a species that not just waged war, but had perfected it into a bitter, predatory art form. It was a rage so absolute, so profound that it had cooled into something far more dangerous: purpose. The alarms blared across the consortium chamber, a symphony of failure. The delegates shrieked in their myriad voices, but the only thing clearly visible through the chaos was the looping hologram on the main screen, human children laughing, playing a game in a prison they had turned into a playground, their joyful, innocent faces, a ghostly, mocking testament to the single greatest miscalculation in galactic history. They had not captured a sample for study. They had armed the detonator of a bomb that had been waiting centuries to explode. Chaos was a Xylo's concept for unoptimized data. What they were experiencing now had no designation. Their fleet, the pride of the consortium, was not being destroyed. It was being dismantled. The Chimera ships moved with a chilling economy of motion, their strikes so precise they felt more like a surgeon's cuts than a warrior's blows. Command and control vanished, replaced by a cacophony of isolated screams in the dark. The luminous elder watched the catastrophe unfold not as a series of tactical icons, but as a web of light, the life force of the consortium being methodically snipped, thread by glittering thread. There was no rage in the human attack, no chaotic fury. There was only a cold, focused, terrifying intent. It was the calculated effort of a species that knew exactly how to break a system down to its component parts because it had spent centuries breaking itself and building itself back up again. In the midst of the carnage, a profound, desperate need to understand overwhelmed the elder. It reached out not through the compromised frequencies of technology, but through the medium it knew as truth, the universal current of consciousness, a whisper on the quantum foam. The thought, faint as starlight, found Marshal Rostova on the bridge of her flagship. Why? It pleaded, the thought form tinged with the elder's shimmering nonverbal colors of confusion and awe. Your species projects warmth, harmony. Your very biology is geared for social bonding. Yet this cold fury, it is ancient, efficient, absolute. How can two such opposite truths exist in the same vessel? We must understand. Rostova stood before the main view screen, watching the silent, beautiful destruction her orders had wrought. She did not turn. For a long moment she said nothing, and the elder thought its plea had been lost. Then, a single data packet encrypted with a quantum key woven from pure mathematics was transferred directly to the elder's containment field. Its designation was simple: File 001, Legacy. Rostova's voice, a ghost in the machine, followed it. Understand this, she said, her tone devoid of triumph, filled only with a great and terrible weariness. And you will understand us. The luminous elder opened the file. It was not data, it was a memory. And the elder did not see the images, it became them. Suddenly it was not a being of light in a fluidic tank, but a young man cowering in the cold, stinking mud of a trench, the shriek of incoming artillery a physical blow against its soul. It felt the primal, animal terror mixed with a brotherly love for the trembling man beside him. The scene shifted. It was a mother in a burning city, her mind a vortex of grief as she clutched a child's empty shoe. It felt the cold, industrial evil of a concentration camp, the dehumanizing logic of genocide that was chillingly familiar, a dark mirror of the Xylos' own philosophy. It experienced the blinding, arrogant flash of a star born on Earth, a man-made sun that devoured a city in a single prideful heartbeat, followed by an eternity of ash-filled regret and the phantom taste of radiation. It felt the hate, the fear, the despair, the cruelty, the bottomless capacity for violence that this species possessed. It was a history written in blood and fire, a litany of self-inflicted wounds so deep they had permanently scarred the species' collective soul. But threaded through the horror was something else, a desperate, stubborn refusal to die. It saw a hand reaching from rubble, a shared crust of bread in a gulag, a defiant song sung in the face of tyranny.
This was not a species defined by its violence, but by its survival of that violence. The luminous elder recoiled, its inner light dimming, its form contracting as if struck by a physical blow. The data stream ended, and it understood. The smiles, the politeness, the jokes, the teacup, they were not signs of a gentle nature. They were the signs of a species that had stared into the abyss of its own heart and learned, through unimaginable pain, to build a cage around the monster within. Their civilization wasn't a natural state. It was a desperate, daily act of will. It was a self-imposed leash, forged in the fires of their own hell, maintained not because they were weak, but because they knew better than anyone the terrifying strength they held in reserve. They were polite not because they were harmless, but because they were so profoundly dangerous that they had to be. Their warmth was the heat of a furnace door, tightly sealed. Their humor was the gallows laugh of a survivor who had seen the worst the universe had to offer and found it within themselves. The elder finally grasped the terrible truth. The Consortium hadn't been dealing with a promising pre-space flight species. They had been negotiating with the traumatized, heavily armed survivors of an apocalypse that had lasted 10,000 years. It sent a single desperate pulse to its home world, a warning that would be carved into their memory crystals, a scripture of pure fear. Turn back. Cease all action. We did not misjudge a primitive species. We misjudged the self-control of a predator.
The siege of the Crucible was a silent one. The Chimera fleet, a collection of brutalist, asymmetrical predators, held their positions in a perfect sphere of containment around the station. They did not broadcast threats. They did not demand surrender on open channels. They simply waited, their very presence a suffocating pressure on the fractured Consortium. A direct, encrypted line opened between Marshal Rostova's flagship and what remained of the Consortium's command. Her face appeared before them, as calm and weary as it had been at the very beginning. "Our terms are simple," she stated, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "You will release our children, unharmed and immediately. You will surrender Executor 7 and its entire command staff for debriefing. You have 10 minutes to comply." In the Consortium chamber, chaos erupted, but above the noise, the flickering form of Executor 7 pulsed with a final, desperate frequency. "Illogical," it transmitted, its logic now frayed into something resembling raw panic. "You would risk your own young? We will vent the atmosphere in their sector. We will detonate the fusion core. You will not have them back." The other delegates froze in horror. They were witnessing the complete and utter breakdown of a species that defined itself by its lack of emotion. A creature of pure logic, when its logic failed, had nothing left but the most primitive instinct of all, a cornered animal's suicidal spite. Rostova did not flinch. Her expression did not change. She simply looked past Executor 7, addressing the chamber at large. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," she said, her voice laced with a profound, almost pitiful disappointment. "You still believe this is a negotiation. You think you hold leverage." She made a subtle gesture to her comms officer. "Please patch in the priority feed from the Xylos system for the entire council." A new holographic window opened in the center of the chamber. It showed the breathtaking beauty of Xylos Prime, a planet of towering, iridescent crystal continents and shimmering methane oceans. It was a jewel of perfect geometrical order. And then from the blackness, the second fleet emerged. This one was far larger than the force at the Crucible. Great, menacing carriers and battleships, the true heart of Project Chimera, decloaked from stealth, their forms eclipsing the local suns, casting long, predatory shadows across the crystalline world below. They did not fire. They simply took up orbital positions, a ring of silent, patient executioners. There was no speech, no threat. There was only the image. The message was as clear and as absolute as a law of physics. You can destroy our children. In response, your species and its memory will be erased from this universe. The choice is yours. It was the luminous elder who broke the stunned silence. Its form pulsed with a brilliant, decisive light. The Consortium of the Learned hereby invokes Article 7 of its charter, the censure and expulsion of a member species that threatens galactic stability. Its thoughts washed over the chamber, carrying the undeniable weight of truth. All in favor of removing the Xylos. Every hand, every tentacle, every appendage in the room, save for those of the Xylos delegate, was raised. The vote was instantaneous. The war was over. The halls of the UEDF flagship, the Indomitable, had never known the sound of children's laughter. Now the metallic corridors echoed with it. The Sparks were home. They were wrapped in warm blankets, clutching cups of hot chocolate, their faces smeared with sweet residue. They were not broken. They were tired, yes, but their eyes shone with a defiant light. Soldiers in full Chimera assault armor, figures of terrifying power who had just dismantled an empire, knelt down, their movements gentle, removing their dark helmets to show smiling human faces. Maya, the little girl who had started a rebellion with a shoe, walked right up to Marshal Rostova, who stood watching the reunion from a distance. The child looked up at the woman who had burned a galaxy for her. "Did you hurt them?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Rostova looked down, and the weariness in her eyes softened. She knelt, bringing herself level with the child. "We did," she said, her voice honest and soft, "but they hurt themselves more when they forgot a simple rule." She gently brushed a stray hair from Maya's face. The child's brow furrowed. "What rule?" Rostova's gaze drifted to the star-dusted view screen, where the consortium ships were now retreating in disorganized disgrace. "Anger is a fire that burns you too, little spark," the marshal murmured. "We weren't angry. We were clear. We were drawing a line, not in the sand, but in the stars. A line that says, here and no further. We taught them that some things are not for study, not for negotiation, and not to be touched, ever." She pulled the girl into a gentle hug, the scent of hot chocolate and recycled air filling her senses. It was the scent of victory. "Teaching them that lesson, so they never make this mistake again with anyone else," she whispered into Maya's hair. "That is more important than anger. That is how we stay civilized."